What does a confined month of Ramadan look like? Hello, everyone. I'm François Picard. Welcome to the France 24 debate. Yeah, after Easter and the Jewish feast of Passover, Muslims the world over now embark on a month of fasting and prayer. And in many places, it's happening under lockdown. How do you practice your faith when you can't go to the mosque? When you can't invite loved ones and good friends for the Iftar, the nightly breaking of the fast? Same as with other religions, we'll ask who in the Muslim world is putting public safety before centuries old rites and practices, and who's ignoring the ethics of social distancing. More broadly, religion's about faith and also about community. When we're asked, like with last weekend's planetary benefit concert, to be together at home, what does that mean? Deconfinement could be a very gradual process where houses of worship, certainly the smaller ones, could stay shut a long while. What will be the impact of that? Saudi Arabia has asked those planning the pilgrimage to Mecca in late July to delay booking in case it's canceled. How will we all, as humans, be when we come out of this unprecedented period of self isolation? Today, in the France 24 debate, we're looking at Ramadan in times of COVID-19. And joining us, well, let's go from east to west, if you will. We begin in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, and say Ramadan Mubarak to Huda
Hi,
Ramli, a program
Ramadan
officer for the
Kareem.
civic group Sisters in Islam, which promotes empowerment and gender equality within Islam. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for inviting us.
We want to welcome as well from Lahore in Pakistan, journalist Umair Jamal, correspondent for The Diplomat. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you for having me.
From the capital of Bahrain, Manama, Yemeni journalist Mesa Shujaldeen is with us. You are a non-resident fellow at SANA's Center for Strategic Studies. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And from New Haven, Connecticut, Abdul Rahman Malik, lecturer in Islamic Studies at Yale's Divinity School. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
The France 24 debate, where you can always weigh in on the conversation on Facebook and Twitter. Our hashtag is F24debate. Yeah, it's a month of fasting that is going to be unlike any other. Fraser Jackson has more.
How do you walk the fine line between observing religious practices and adhering to public health advice? As Ramadan begins, hundreds of millions of Muslims around the world are asking themselves that very question. From Malaysia to the United Arab Emirates, mosques have been closed by government order, with people told to pray at home. In Yemen, disinfection methods were enforced as the streets of Sana'a filled with people rushing to prepare for the fast. Despite the seeming lack of social distancing in this shop, traders say COVID-19 has discouraged some of their customers. Italy is one of the many countries that have ordered mosques and Muslim cultural centres to remain closed during the lockdown. The Veneto region is home to more than 130,000 Muslims. Imams there have taken a new approach for their call to prayer.
Di aiutarci a poter disporre di uno spazio di presenza nelle televisioni regionali, uno spazio di pochi minuti per un richiamo alla preghiera con la lettura in lingua italiana di qualche passo del nobile Corano. Sarà anche un modo per trasformare l'emergenza Covid-19 in una crescita ed un miglioramento della convivenza tra le persone.
In the majority of countries, religious institutions have been covered in government health orders, but that isn't the case everywhere. In Pakistan and Bangladesh, where the population totals over 375 million people, no order has been given to mosques to shut down, despite the countries technically being in lockdown.
Well, let's begin there. Umair Jamal, your social distancing for this Ramadan?
Well, yes, I am, but unfortunately, this is not the situation countrywide. You may, as the report said, that Pakistan has not announced to, keep mosques closed during the month of Ramadan, and it's a very illogical, policy decision. So, like last year, millions are going to be in mosques for the entire month. And this is unfortunately happening at a time of COVID-19 crisis, and with all data suggesting that May is going to be a month for Pakistan when that this COVID-19 situation peaks in the country. So it's going to it's like Pakistan is sleepwalking into a major crisis, and
for you
this
personally,
has.
on that score, how are you going to practice your faith during this month?
Well, my family and I, we are going to stay at home, and for the entire month, and only time we go out is buy essentials, and we have been practicing this for an entire month now. My father, who is a devout Muslim in terms of attending prayers at mosque, so for the last 1 month, my mother, my father, and I, we have had prayers at home, and we have done everything which you normally go to mosque for at home. So that is what we are going to do for the rest of the month.
Let me ask you, Nuruda Ramli, in Malaysia, people have been under lockdown. It's a very different story where you are.
Actually, it's good that the religious authorities as well as our muftis and imams, listening to our Ministry of Health very well. So right now, whatever announcement made by the Director General of the Health, is listened very well, and therefore they've issued fatwa of, not to open the mosque during this pandemic period. And basically, this is something that we can applaud the religious authority working well and listening well to the Ministry of Health. And also, what I it's just that concerning when the religious authority, for me, is a concern when they do not further educate our community here how actually rituals can be done anywhere rather than the mosque, because basically the spirituality is not supposed to be confined within the mosque. That one I see a lack from our religious authorities as well as the clerics, how to educate people on spirituality during this lockdown period.
So what's the
Not only
message they should be giving out?
they should be giving out messages and keep reminding people that that this you can pray anywhere, not just the mosque. And actually Ramadan is okay if you don't pray at the mosque, especially during Tarawih, which is the night prayer. And you can use, and this is the time you should practice to do Tarawih prayer with your families, because that's also part of the sunnah of the Prophet before. So yeah, this is actually the time to do the ritual together, rather than doing at the mosque and then leave some members of the family at home.
Let me ask you, Abdul Rahman Malik, my Arabic language alter ego from the France 24 debate, Tawfiq Mjayed, taught me this phrase. Bear with my Arabic. Tazahamu tarahamu. The tighter you rub elbows, the more the mercy of God will be upon you, it says in the Quran. Social distancing, well, that goes against that, doesn't it?
It's so interesting. I think there's obviously a religious sensibility around communal practice, but as my brothers and sisters here who've joined us this morning have quite rightfully pointed out, the practice of Ramadan in particular is a remarkably personal practice. The theology and the spirituality around Ramadan is cultivating this direct connection with the divine, and to inculcate a glorious inner spirituality through the denial of food, drink, and intimacy during the daylight hours. And while the practice of Ramadan is often communal, the preservation of life and community, the protection of our neighbors, the service to those around us, these are high values, and in fact, higher values even than ritual. And so here in the United States, and generally amongst Muslims in the West, in places like the United Kingdom, in France, and elsewhere, there has been really a consensus amongst religious institutions and amongst Muslims in general, that this is the time not only to fully immerse ourselves in what is required, but also to cultivate the inner life, faith, and connection in the family. And of course, as we're doing now, all in our various homes in various parts of the world, it's the use of technology that's been so interesting. How all of a sudden our communal activities, the sharing of spiritual reflection, the gathering in community has moved entirely online. I'll give you an example, Francois. Here at Yale University, we have a robust Muslim community. We have a chaplain who's funded by the university, part of the incredible chaplaincy team here in New Haven. And on Fridays, instead of the Friday prayer, there's a Friday reflection where members of the community are sharing various spiritual perspectives, checking in on one another. On Monday nights, over 60, 70 students get together online with the Muslim chaplain here to talk about how the week has been, to prepare for Ramadan. And in fact, community after community has been planning a whole range of activities, gatherings, prayers, moments for remembrance. So we've actually seen that entire communal life move online. That's not to say it's not going to be unusual, that it's not going to be difficult. And I think one of the things that's going to be really difficult for communities is that Ramadan is a time of service and of giving. Here in my city and in hundreds of cities across North America and Europe, we know that our mosques and community institutions become places where food banks are run, where soup kitchens are run, where meals are delivered. I think a lot of our concerns right now are for those members, not only of our community, but our neighbors and our neighborhoods who are suffering under the economic effects of COVID-19 as much as under the possible medical effects. And I know that there's a great pain in the community on how do we be charitable at this time.
Yeah, so let me rebound on that with Mesa Shojaldin in Manama. First of all, what's lockdown been like? What's the situation where you are at the outset of Ramadan?
If you talk about Manama, where I live, the country was totally shut down like 2 or 3 weeks. Now they start to reopen it. But in Yemen, there is nothing changed. Nothing. I mean, nothing, because they closed the mosques for like 1 week. Only in certain areas, which are the government control area in the south. But now they resumed working. They said no corona cases in Yemen. Actually, there is no test kits in Yemen. So they didn't record, they record only 1 case in Hadramaut. It was 2 weeks ago. And there is no measures like social distance or anything of this kind, anything of that can be done or should be done. So the life is normal in Yemen, and the people gathering is the same as usual.
And Mesa, let me ask you on that, because this is a country that's in the throes of war right now. And you've had a cholera epidemic. You've had lots of epidemics. When people hear in Yemen about COVID-19, do they just say, well, it's just one more thing?
Maybe, or maybe they feel they are far from the world. They are isolated somehow. But the country received flight until the mid of March, when they shut down the airport. But they feel they are isolated, and they are different, maybe because they are isolated, so they didn't receive any cases of corona cases, because the only case was identified in Hadramaut. He was an aged man who works in the port of Hadramaut. So the people, they feel it's far from them. This is what I think, yani, what I feel from the people when they talk. It's far from us, and we don't. And there is another problem here. In Yemen, they face the dengue fever, and it was a pandemic in Yemen, and still it's going on. And this dengue fever is very similar to corona in its symptoms, and it can kill. So the people at many hospitals received people who suffer from breathing and that kind of the same symptoms, and they can testify it. Is it corona or dengue fever? Because dengue fever, it's in Yemen, it's like years and killed thousands of people.
All right, I want to get back to some of the other challenges that Yemen faces during this period of Ramadan, but let me turn to Nuruda Ramli. I want your reaction to something we heard a moment ago from Abdul Rahman Malik at Yale University there, and that is the communal aspect of this month. It's about people in the evenings when the sun has set, getting together for meals, for the breaking the fast together. It's for helping out those in need. What's it like in Kuala Lumpur right now on that score?
Currently, we are doing it. I mean, with our own family, but there is a tradition of a kind of I do not know. I can say this. This is like a Malay Ramadan ritual, which is before Ramadan, a lot of people will go back to their home village and then I mean celebrate the early part of Ramadan with their mother and father at the village, rather than spending their times or doing the celebration at home. But this time around, I can see there is some sense of restlessness where they cannot do what they used to do before. But what I can say to you, I mean, within
And
this
are those
month,
people, sorry, are those people staying put and not going back to their home village?
oh yeah, this is quite I mean, a development because I thought that all, I mean, I thought all will comply with the MCO rules and regulation, but it turns out that when they heard that the cases are going down and we are going to have, I mean, the numbers are going down. What happened is that the numbers of cars are getting higher, and therefore there is a concern for the COVID cases to be rising up again. So yeah, and that is due to the fact that it is nearing Ramadan, so there's a suspicion that these people are going back to their village to celebrate earlier Ramadan with their families. So,
Uh,
yeah.
Umair Jamal, your thoughts on how perhaps this is impacting the whole of the Muslim faith, what's going on?
Well, I think if I could talk about what is happening in Pakistan, and in the context of Islam being a major religion and how the government has communicated during the entire crisis. So, 2 days ago, Prime Minister of Pakistan, he made a deal with all major groups of different sects, and he said that he's going to announce a day of forgiveness, because this is apparently happening, of due to the wrongdoings of humans. And then he also said that this is a Islam friendly decision for the government to and the clergy to decide that mosques should remain open. And there are other instances when he has said that we are going to fight this crisis with the power of faith. And there have been prime time shows in local media where a lot of journalists have talked about how this is nothing less than God's wrath of wrongdoings of people.
Umair, let me ask you on this. How do Pakistanis feel about the fact that Saudi Arabia, home to Islam's holiest sites, is taking this very seriously, shutting mosques, talking about canceling the Hajj?
Well, it's a very interesting point, and this has been discussed for a week now, because going to Saudi Arabia is there's a lot of awareness what happens in Saudi Arabia in terms of pilgrims and in terms of how close Saudi Arabia is with Pakistan, and with majority of population being from Wahhabi background, there's a lot of association and connectivity. So this question remains a question in Pakistan, because whenever you say to someone that because Saudi Arabia has closed one of the holiest sites of Islam, why cannot this happen in Pakistan? And you go to the government, and I'm sure they want to close the mosque, but then they don't actually have people in power. They don't actually have power. The power in Pakistan resides with the clergy. And they announced more than 2 weeks ago that not only they're going to keep the mosque open, but they also prepared document to send to Saudi Arabia that it's not a good decision to close the mosque or the holiest sites in Islam. So there's a clash of who actually controls the state in Pakistan. And unfortunately, the government, it's been called a consensus, but it has, I would call it a capitulation. And same is happening with Afghanistan. The mosques are open and everything is being prepared for the next 1 month. And in Pakistan, the government, with the help of clergy yesterday, they prepared a document which is going to, I think it's going to be handed to the Saudi embassy in Pakistan, which highlights 20-point action plan to keep mosques open, but with some precautions. So I think that's the kind of messaging which is being being suggested and is going on in Pakistan.
Abdul Rahman Malik, your reaction to what you've just heard Umair Jamal say, which is that, well, effectively, political authorities in Pakistan deferring to religious authorities.
I mean, what Omer describes is really frightening, and for all kinds of reasons. And my family hails from Pakistan as well. Omer, I have family in Lahore and Multan, Rawalpindi, Islamabad, and members of my family have been deeply concerned, and like your family, have been social distancing and isolating. And I think in many ways they feel not only deeply let down by religious authorities, who they didn't really trust in the first place, to be honest, but they feel really let down by the political administration in Pakistan. And there's some dark humor that's come out of all this. I'm sure you've heard it yourself, Umair, in the WhatsApp chats and so on. Pakistani ulama, particularly from across sectarian lines, the Obandi and Barelvi and Ahl Hadith, they never agree on anything, but all of a sudden they've agreed on this. and I think what's concerning is that across the rest of the Islamic world, as Nurul Huda has pointed out, as Mesa has pointed out, we have a broad consensus of religious authorities in places like the Al-Azhar, the Qarawiyyin in the Zaytuna in Tunisia, of the Fatwa councils in the Gulf, in Iran, a consensus that this is not the time to place ritual over human life, that this is not an ordinary circumstance. This is a circumstance of pandemic. This is a circumstance where lives are in danger. And even here in North America, there was a very interesting report from the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation about some mosques in Toronto, Canada's largest city, that were continuing to remain quietly open. And what was really interesting around that was that while were small communities of people who were supporting this opening, there was a massive response from the rest of the community, which has now put an end to most of that. I would say that as both sometimes journalist, sometimes scholar, but certainly someone who considers himself a Muslim and a believer, I think any scholar, any religious authority that allows places of worship to remain open during this time of manifest crisis is culpable and should be held responsible, because they're going to have the deaths of people on their hands. Let's be honest and frank about it.
All right, and on that point, it's not just in Islam where this argument's been going on. Our Jerusalem correspondent reporting that when the COVID outbreak first happened, it was during the Jewish feast of Purim, and the ultra-Orthodox largely ignored social distancing. Then by the time Passover came around, they were respecting it more. Where you are in the United States, though, we're seeing it's part of sort of a political culture war with these Protestant mega churches that insist on remaining open.
It really is, and it's interesting, Francois, how the politics of the moment here in the United States, with the current administration and its base, have been mobilized in a very particular way. And I kind of laugh to myself, kind of a macabre laugh, because some of the arguments that we hear coming from these mega churches sort of mimics the arguments of the mullahs in Pakistan and others who want the mosques to stay open. Very early on during the lockdown, I actually saw a number of posts online from Protestant churches, particularly unaligned and independent churches, talking about this connection between God and protection and the importance of the church. I've definitely seen the tune generally change around that, but I do think that God and the church are being weaponized by a certain political faction in the United States. And you're absolutely right, Francois. It feeds into this broader culture war. And sadly, what's happened with this culture war is that the kind of tweets that have been going out, sometimes from the highest offices in the land, sort of pointing fingers at the minority Muslim community in the United States and elsewhere. We've seen this in the United Kingdom. We've seen this in Europe. That will the authorities take the same actions that they've taken against Christian churches or Jewish synagogues? Will they take those same actions against mosques? And in fact, on the ground in the United Kingdom, in the United States, in Canada, in Europe, and elsewhere, in South Africa, where there's significant minority Muslim communities, what we see is, in fact, a religious consensus that says, stay at home. Practice ritual at home. Use this time of Ramadan to cultivate a strong relationship with your family and those who are close to you. One thing, if you don't mind my saying, Francois,
Sure.
and Mesa, what you said really sort of hit deep. Is that when we see the situation in the Yemen, the Yemen, which has become a battleground for all of these larger political forces, and I have students from the Yemen, and one of my students, her grandmother passed away last year of cholera, and what we've been hearing from her and other Yemeni friends, colleagues, and students is that on the ground, the humanitarian situation is as terrible as ever. And I think part of what we need to do this Ramadan, as journalists, as academics, as activists, is to ensure that the plight of places like the Yemen and the real humanitarian crisis has not disappeared because of COVID. And in fact, it could become worse because of it. And I think that's an awareness issue that I think we as a global community have to work on.
Let's talk about precisely that point. Our news cycle has been dominated by one story, and it's sort of crowded out everything else that's going on around the world. There was this plea back on March the 23rd by the UN Secretary General at the outset of the pandemic, Antonio Guterres, calling for a global ceasefire. Let's listen.
The fury of the virus illustrates the folly of war. That is why today I am calling for an immediate global ceasefire in all corners of the world. It is time to put armed conflict on lockdown and focus together on the true fight of our lives. To warring parties, I say, pull back from hostilities, put aside mistrust and animosity, silence the guns, stop the artillery, end the airstrikes.
That call on March the 23rd. On April 9th, Riyadh seemed to heed the call. Saudi Arabia announcing a COVID-related ceasefire for its campaign in Yemen, its bombing campaign. But the Yemen Data Project last Friday reported at least 106 Saudi-led airstrikes across 26 raids in Yemen over the 1 week after that ceasefire was declared. Mesa Shuljadin, what's the situation today in Yemen?
Actually, no one committed on this ceasefire. At the beginning, when Griffith called for ceasefire, both parties welcomed.
Oliver Griffiths.
Yeah, and both parties welcomed them, and they said that, okay, we are going to apply ceasefire on the ground, but no one committed it. And there is a battle in Marib, which is inside Yemen. It's a very important place. and it's going on since then, since that time. We are talking about since February till now. It's going on, and it didn't stop even 1 minute. So actually, after Saudi call for ceasefire, when they announced they are going to commit ceasefire in Yemen, the Houthis didn't welcome this announcement, and they said they should stop the war, not only ceasefire. And the Houthi and Saudis exchanged fires since that. The Saudis hit Yemen, and the Houthis also send their missiles to Yemen, to Saudi Arabia. So nothing changed in this aspect in Yemen, and no one committed in this ceasefire. And the internal war even is going on, and it's going worse, because we are talking about Marib. Marib is a city that hosting displaced, like 3 million displaced, not 3 million, more than 2 millions of displaced from the war in Yemen. So the situation there is miserable if the war is going much worse there. And now around Marib, there are the bottles around the city. Maybe it's going to be inside the city after a while.
And in this period of Ramadan, what can change?
It should be, because it's even religiously that Ramadan is one of the Ashhur Hurum, yani the months that the Muslims should stop the war in this month. But in that 5 years in Yemen, they didn't stop any war in Ramadan. They always said, okay, in the beginning of Ramadan, and we are going to stop the war, but no one do this. So in Ramadan, they continue the war normally. And I think they should do. They should do, because Ramadan, Corona, because of many things. But what should be, it can't be. It's not necessarily the fact what happened in Yemen. Here I want to talk about another thing about the measures against Corona, like water. In Yemen, the access to water is not that easy. When you are talking to people, okay, wash your hand. It's not easy to get water because of this, the cholera. Because the people don't have the access to the clean water. So when you talk about a very simple measure against Corona, the people can do it.
That's an essential point. Umair Jamal, when we discussed how COVID-19 was affecting the African continent in places where they'd had lockdowns during the Ebola crisis, that issue of clean water was essential. Can you do lockdown in Pakistan, or can you do self-isolation in places where you don't have access to clean water?
Well, I would agree to with my sister. It's a very difficult situation. Just to add, Pakistan is one of the few countries where polio. We still have polio cases, and our healthcare system is very bad. And in terms of availability of water, Pakistan is one of the extreme water-stressed countries, if not in South Asia. I think it's beyond the South Asian region. And here in Lahore, even though I have water availability at home, if, for a general use, but if I want to drink water, I need to get a bottle of water. And so, and this is in a city which is which makes one of the major urban centers in Pakistan. And if you travel outside, major cities, for example, Karachi, Lahore, or Islamabad, the issue of availability of water is a major concern. And I don't think people are actually aware of how big the issue is. Yesterday, I came across a report that more than 50% of the Pakistani population is actually they don't have an idea what the COVID-19 crisis actually is. And more than 70% of people in Pakistan, they do not have the access of clean water in terms of drinking or in terms of any other use, and that leads to a lot of diseases. And we have we have, in Pakistan, water has been one of the reasons that of majority of diseases in the country. And with it sort of adds to the discussion that, with when you have a precondition and you unfortunately become a victim of coronavirus, the chances of surviving
All right.
with a precondition are actually not that great. So I think
let me just, because we're running short on time, and I want to go around the room on something important, which is how the next month is going to go, and basically how this may change religion as a whole. I'll begin with you, Nurhuda Ramli in Kuala Lumpur. How do you imagine this period of confinement, where the breaking of the fast, the iftar, where you're in a situation where you're confined to your apartment or to your home and no longer able to go out with your friends? Is that going to be a different experience of faith?
I would not go beyond this Ramadan period, because currently we are having a situation here in Malaysia where actually when the MCO started, a lot of people actually, Malaysians really show their empathy with other people. Within the members of the community, and we can see the solidarity there. The fundraising is everywhere. NGOs, individuals easily get funds to help those who lost their job, or who don't have money to buy their essentials and whatnot. We are
So
good
you're
at
saying
that.
this is
Yeah,
a chance for
yeah.
humanity to reset its priorities.
But I need to extend that my concern here, because right now what happened is that that kind of kindness and empathy is not being extended to the refugees community, because right now we are being tested literally. Just before, it happens yesterday or last 2 days, where our minister made an announcement that we have to turn away the boats of refugees from of Rohingya communities. So we can, the Muslim communities really really show their own their own phase of xenophobic this kind of nuance, and I'm very concerned of that, because
But
we are
can that
actually,
solidarity, though, that you expressed, can it be
yeah.
something that sort of gets people to rethink a bit their priorities?
The problem is that our Malaysians are really good at taking care of their fellow citizens, but it is not really extended to the migrant workers, especially those from coming from the third world countries, and what more of refugees from the Rohingya communities, for example, because basically Malaysians are not really keen in helping them. Not just that, the xenophobic comments coming from the Malay Muslim communities about how these people are bad, they're supposed to be turned away. They bring up a lot of problems to Malaysia, and Malaysia should not supposed to accept them, and yada yada. So yeah, this is for me a test for all of us here in Malaysia to further educate our Muslims fellows to be much more compassionate. Not just being selectively compassionate; it must be extended to our brothers and sisters, Muslim brothers and sisters
Yeah.
from other countries, those who are marginalized and also oppressed.
Abdul Rahman Malik, you just heard it there. Nuruddha Ramli expressing, I guess you could call it a healthy skepticism about human nature's ability to change. How is this test of humanity going to impact the Muslim faith?
A faith is a powerful force. We know that religious identity is a powerful force. Faith will survive COVID as it survived other crises. I think the question, and Nurhuda, I wholeheartedly agree. I think this, at this particular moment, not only for Muslims, not only for people of faith, but of all faiths and none, is a challenge to not only our core humanity, but also our ability to be creative, and for our ability to be innovative, and for our ability to find ways to express that humanity in a way that matters through advocacy, raising our voices, through technological connection, through ensuring that we are aware.
Does it change Islam the way it is? If for instance, for the first time, well, since I don't know when, the pilgrimage to Mecca has to be scrapped.
Frankly, I don't think it does. We've had moments in the past, dozens of times, when the pilgrimage has been canceled. I would say that the call and challenge of faith today is, how do we best serve humanity, our neighbors, our friends, with love, compassion, generosity, mercy, and justice. And now is the time that we should be raising our voices on all those counts, joining hands with friends of people of faith and people of no faith, that this is a challenge to our collective humanity. And what my faith calls me to is that humanity over ritual, humanity over dogma, humanity over the minutia. If I believe that we're all created by the same divine, that we all stand under the same sun, that we all owe something to Mother Earth, and this is the time for increased awareness, for increased advocacy and activism. And those of us who have the tools to do it should do it. Those of us who can organize should organize, and we should continue to advocate the authorities, governments, and states to address the real the issues of marginalization, the issues of economic justice, which are at the very heart of the COVID crisis. The problems of late-stage capitalism, Francois, have been writ large here. That's not a problem of faith. That's a problem of unequal, unjust economic and political order. And this is the time that we as people of faith, we as Muslims and others, should be raising our voices against that.
All right, I want to thank you so much, Abdul Rahman Malik, for joining us from New Haven, Connecticut. I want to thank as well Nur Huda Ramli for being with us from Kuala Lumpur, Mesa Shujaldeen in Bahrain, and as well Umar Jamal in Lahore, Pakistan. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate. You can continue the conversation on our Facebook page and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and of course on France24.com.